The morning sun peeked through the windows of the classroom as the bell rang. It was the start of a new school year. Kids chattered with excitement, hugging old friends, meeting new ones, and adjusting backpacks that still smelled brand new. In a corner near the window, a quiet girl sat alone. She kept her eyes on the desk, fingers fidgeting with the edge of her notebook. Her name was Amara. She was in 6th grade, and this was her first day at a new school. Amara had moved to this city over the summer with her mother and grandmother. Everything felt unfamiliar, the neighborhood, the people, even the smell of the air. But most of all, she was nervous about speaking. Amara had a stutter. Words didn't always come out the way she wanted them to. Sometimes they stuck like gum at the back of her throat, refusing to move. She was used to it by now. She'd been going to speech therapy since she was 5. But new places always made it harder. New places meant new people. And new people meant more staring, more whispering, more waiting for her to get the words out. All right, class? Quiet down, please. The teacher clapped her hands twice, getting everyone's attention. She was a tall woman with glasses and a no-nonsense tone. Her name was Miss Cartwright. As she scanned the room, her eyes stopped at Amara. "We have a new student with us today," she said, motioning toward the window side of the classroom. "Why don't you stand up and introduce yourself?" Amara's stomach dropped. Her hands turned cold. She felt 20 pairs of eyes turn in her direction. She slowly stood up, holding on to the edge of the desk like it would keep her from falling. Hi. My name is She tried, but the words wouldn't come. Her mouth opened again, but only a breath escaped. A few students snickered. One of the boys in the back tried to hide his laugh behind a cough. Miss Cartwright sighed loudly. "Take your time," she said, but her tone wasn't gentle. It sounded more like she was already out of patience. Amara's cheeks burned. Her eyes stared at the floor. "All right, that's enough. You can sit," the teacher said quickly, waving her hand like she was brushing off a fly. "Next time, try to come prepared." The class turned their heads back, but Amara could still feel their eyes on her. She sat down slowly, her throat tight and her fingers trembling. One girl sitting nearby looked at her with soft eyes, like she wanted to say something kind, but the moment passed. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of lessons and introductions. Amara couldn't focus. She just kept hearing the teacher's voice in her head. "Next time, try to come prepared." Like it was her fault. Like she hadn't practiced that moment 100 times in the mirror. At lunch, Amara sat alone under a tree in the schoolyard. She opened her lunchbox, but the sandwich inside stayed untouched. Her mind was still spinning. She pulled out a small notebook from her bag. Inside were little poems and drawings she did when her words didn't work out loud. Writing was her safe place. The notebook was full of thoughts she couldn't say. She flipped to a clean page and began to write. She didn't notice the group of kids passing nearby. One of them, a boy with messy hair and untied shoes, saw her writing and pointed. "Hey, look," he said. "The new girl's writing spells or something. Is she a witch?" A few others laughed. Amara closed the notebook quickly and stood up. Leave me alone," she said, her voice shaky but clear. The boy smirked. "Whatever. Weird girl." They walked away, still laughing. Amara sat back down, notebook pressed against her chest. She blinked back, the sting in her eyes. She didn't want to cry. Not here. When the school day finally ended, she rushed outside. Her grandmother was waiting by the gate in her usual blue sweater and scarf, holding a small cloth bag. She smiled the moment she saw Amara. "Hey, baby girl. How was your first day?" her grandmother asked. Amara didn't answer right away. She just hugged her tight. Her grandmother didn't ask again. She could tell something was wrong, but she also knew her granddaughter. She knew that when Amara was ready, she would talk. They walked home in silence, past rows of houses with trimmed lawns and barking dogs. Amara's mom was still at work, so the house was quiet when they got in. Her grandmother put on the kettle for tea and made her a warm grilled cheese sandwich. They sat together at the small kitchen table. Amara finally spoke, her words slow but clear enough to understand. "Everyone laughed when I couldn't say my name?" Her grandmother's eyes softened. She reached out and placed her warm hand on Amara's. "And what did you do after that?" she asked gently. Amara shrugged. Nothing. I just, wanted to disappear." Her grandmother was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned back in her chair and smiled. "Just a little. You know," she said, "I had a stutter too. Long ago." "During the war," Amara blinked. "Whoa, what war?" "The Second World War," her grandmother said. "I was just a little older than you when it started, but I worked in a place no one talks about much. We listened to enemy codes and we broke them." Amara's mouth opened slightly. You were a codebreaker?" Her grandmother chuckled softly. "Not many people know. It wasn't something we bragged about. We were told to keep it quiet, but yes, we worked in secret. Some of us couldn't even tell our families. And guess what? Most of us were women. Some of us had accents. Some of us stuttered. Some of us didn't even finish school, but we were smart. And we were brave." Amara sat up a little straighter. "But how could you do that with a stutter?" Her grandmother smiled wider. "Because breaking codes isn't about speaking perfectly. It's about seeing patterns, listening closely, thinking in ways others don't. My stutter made me better at that. I had to pay more attention than other people. I had to find other ways to express myself. Just like you do in your notebook." She tapped the bag she'd brought with her. "Come with me. I want to show you something." They went to her room, where she opened an old wooden chest. Inside were faded papers, medals, photographs, and a small, worn notebook. She handed it to Amara. "This was mine. I used to write in it when I couldn't speak clearly, just like you do now." Amara opened the notebook carefully. Inside were rows of symbols, numbers, and sketches. It looked like another language. But there were also little poems, thoughts, and even a drawing of her grandmother as a young girl. Amara held it in her hands like treasure. "You see," her grandmother said, "the world may try to shame you for the things that make you different. But one day, those things could be your biggest strength." That night, as Amara sat at her desk, she looked out the window at the stars. For the first time since school started, she didn't feel so alone. She picked up her own notebook and began to write, not to escape, but to create. Something had changed in her. And tomorrow, she would walk back into that classroom with her head just a little higher. The next morning came with a light drizzle and a cool breeze that wrapped around the streets like a whisper. Amara stood in front of her mirror, brushing down the edges of her hair with calm, practiced hands. There was a new softness in her eyes, not confidence yet, but something like a spark. Something quietly growing. Her grandmother had placed a small, folded piece of paper in her backpack that morning before she left for school. "Just in case you forget who you are," she'd said, winking as she handed it over. Amara hadn't opened it yet, but she felt its presence like a secret tucked close to her heart. At school, everything looked the same: the hallway chatter, the clatter of lockers, the long stretch of the day ahead. But Amara noticed something different in herself. She walked slower, steadier, even made brief eye contact with a classmate who nodded politely as he passed. When she entered the classroom, Miss Cartwright didn't look up. The teacher was already scribbling something on the board. "Everyone, settle down. Open your reading books to page 46, she called. Voice sharp and quick. Amara sat at her desk and opened her book, but she didn't look at the page right away. She glanced around the room. Some kids were chatting quietly, others flipping through pages. One boy at the front had his hand raised, asking if they'd be reading aloud today. Miss Cartwright sighed. "Yes, we'll be going in order. 1 paragraph each." Amara's chest tightened. She hated reading aloud even more than speaking in front of the class. She could never predict where the words would trip her up or how long the pauses would last. It felt like waiting for a storm to pass while everyone stared. Names were being called. Paragraphs were being read. One by one, the students took their turn. Then, "Amara, you're next." She froze. There it was again, the silence, the expectant eyes. She felt her heartbeat in her ears. She looked down at the page. The words swam in her vision. She opened her mouth. No. A few heads turned. She tried again. The night was more laughter. Louder this time, not just giggles, but full snorts. One voice even said, "Oh boy, here we go again." Miss Cartwright didn't stop them. Instead, she crossed her arms. "Amara, please just try to get through it. We don't have all day." That was it. The crack split wide open. Amara slowly closed the book and stood up. I can't." Miss Cartwright raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? I said I can't, not like this." A few students gasped. Others stared in surprise. No one had ever seen her speak up before, not even like this. "Stutter or not." Miss Cartwright scoffed. "Sit down, Amara. This is a classroom, not a stage." But Amara didn't sit. Instead, she reached into her backpack and pulled out the folded paper her grandmother had given her. She unfolded it slowly, hands still shaking. It had just 6 words on it. "You are more than your stutter." Something in her shifted. She didn't say another word, but she walked up to the teacher's desk and placed the note down, then turned and walked straight out the door. The hallway outside was empty. Her legs felt weak, but her chest felt light. She sat on the bench just outside the office, not crying, not even embarrassed, just breathing. A few minutes later, the door creaked. A voice called her name, this time not with annoyance, but caution. It wasn't Miss Cartwright. It was a staff member from the school support team. A younger woman with gentle eyes and curly hair tied back neatly. She introduced herself quietly and asked if Amara wanted to talk. Amara nodded. They sat in the quiet room next to the office. No ringing bells, no desks. Just calm walls and warm air. And for the first time, Amara told someone about her grandmother, the code breaking, the notebook. The words that stuck and the ones that didn't. The woman listened carefully. No interruptions, no corrections. And when Amara finished, she said something no one else had said all day. That was brave. Amara looked down at her lap. You think so?" "I do," the woman replied. "And I think a lot of people have no idea how much strength it takes just to speak when you have to fight your own voice. But I also think maybe it's time they learn." The next day didn't start like the one before. There was a subtle shift in the air when Amara walked through the school gates. Maybe it was in the way 2 kids paused their conversation to glance her way, not with mockery, but curiosity. Maybe it was the quiet nod she got from the front desk lady when she signed in a few minutes early. Amara's legs still felt wobbly, and her voice hadn't magically changed overnight. But something had settled in her, something steady. Like the paper her grandmother had given her still whispered from her backpack, "You are more than your stutter." When she walked into the classroom, a hush rolled over the usual morning chatter. A few students exchanged looks. Someone muttered, "That's the girl who walked out." Miss Cartwright was at her desk, stacking papers. She looked up when Amara entered, her lips tightening for just a second. But then she simply said, "Take your seat." No welcome back. No comment at all. But something flickered behind the teacher's eyes. Something unsettled. As Amara settled into her seat, a girl from 2 rows over leaned slightly toward her. Not too close, not enough to make a scene, just enough to whisper, "That was cool, what you did yesterday." Amara blinked. She hadn't expected that. She gave a small nod, lips pressed into a shy smile. The lesson began as usual. Math first, then science. By the time lunch rolled around, Amara had gotten through half the day without anyone laughing. She hadn't spoken aloud in class and she hadn't needed to, but the silence around her was no longer cold. It felt more like space room for something to grow. At lunch, she sat under the same tree. This time, she wasn't alone. 2 kids from her class, 1 boy with glasses and a girl wearing a paint-stained hoodie, walked over with their lunch trays. "Can we sit?" the girl asked, a sandwich already halfway unwrapped. Amara nodded slowly. She moved her notebook off the grass and made space. They ate in quiet for a minute. Then the boy said, "I stuttered when I was younger. Not as much anymore, but it used to be really bad." Amara looked at him. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't pitying. He was just remembering. "It's like your mouth knows what to do," he continued, "but it still panics. Like it's scared people won't wait long enough." Amara nodded. "Yeah, Exactly, the girl chimed in. People are just impatient. They don't know what to do with quiet. But I liked when you walked out. That was kind of a boss move, Amara laughed. A small one, but real. The rest of lunch passed like that. For the first time since arriving at school, she felt like herself, but the real surprise came that afternoon, right before dismissal. The door opened, and the same woman from the support room entered the classroom. She spoke to Miss Cartwright in a low voice, then turned to face the students. We'll be starting a small student project next week, she announced, for those interested in family history and storytelling. If you've got a grandparent, uncle, aunt, or anyone in your life with a powerful story to tell, you'll get to work with them to create a short presentation. Could be photos, a video, a drawing, however you want to tell it. She paused, and I've invited Amara to share hers first. Amara froze. Miss Cartwright raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard. The students turned toward Amara. Some looked curious. Others just surprised, the woman continued. She's going to tell us about someone in her life who used her mind to help change history. A low murmur passed through the room. Miss Cartwright hesitated. We usually plan these kinds of activities ahead of time. The woman smiled politely. This one's been in the works longer than you know. Amara didn't speak. She didn't have to, but inside, something burned quietly, a mix of nerves and something stronger. Purpose. After class, Miss Cartwright stopped her. I wasn't told about this ahead of time, she said sharply. I hope you're prepared. Amara met her eyes for the first time. I am. Then she walked away. Back home, her grandmother was already boiling water for tea. The house smelled like cinnamon and warmth. Amara walked into the kitchen and placed her notebook on the table. I want to tell them, she said. About what you did, what you were? Her grandmother turned, surprised. Then she smiled. You sure? Amara nodded. Yeah. I'm ready now. The weekend came with heavy gray clouds and the soft tap of rain on windows. Inside the small living room, Amara sat cross-legged on the floor beside her grandmother's armchair, surrounded by books, photos, and a shoebox filled with memories. On the table lay a faded black and white picture of a group of young women in uniforms, standing in front of a building with high fences. In the center, her grandmother as a young girl, barely 18, stared into the camera, her chin high and her hands folded in front of her. Amara picked up the photo carefully. Is this where you worked? Her grandmother nodded. Bletchley Park. It was a secret. The kind of place where your real job didn't match what it said on paper? What did yours say? Amara asked. Librarian, her grandmother replied with a sly smile. But I was never organizing books. We were listening to enemy radio. Signals, trying to break their codes. Every day we had to stay calm, quiet, and focused even when we were scared. Amara stared at the photo, imagining her grandmother surrounded by machines, cables and pages filled with strange letters and numbers. Did you ever mess up? She asked quietly. Of course, her grandmother said. We all did. But every mistake helped us learn faster. And sometimes being the one who saw what others didn't, that made all the difference. Amara thought about that for a long time. Later that night, while the rain tapped gently outside, Amara sat at the kitchen table with her notebook open and a blank page staring back at her. She had 2 days to prepare. She didn't want to just talk about her grandmother's story. She wanted to show it, to make people feel it. But how? Words were tricky. Speaking them out loud still made her stomach twist, but images, sounds, symbols, those were different. Those had always come easier. She pulled out scissors, glue, a stack of colored papers, and printouts of some of the documents her grandmother had saved. She worked quietly, snipping and pasting. She made a timeline. She sketched out old radios, drew maps with dotted lines, recreated parts of a coded message from memory. By midnight, the poster board she'd built was full, rich with stories, colors, and mystery. At the center, she glued a copy of her grandmother's photo and wrote one sentence beneath it in bold letters. She didn't shout loud, but she changed everything. The next morning, Amara's mom peeked into the kitchen and stopped short. Wow, she said, walking over. You made all this? Amara nodded. For the presentation. Her mom leaned down, studying the details. They're going to love this. You did something really special. Amara didn't reply, but a small part of her warned that. Her grandmother handed her a small box. What's this? Amara asked. Open it. Inside was a metal round, golden, with a ribbon so old it had frayed at the edges. Service to Allied Communications, her grandmother explained. They gave these to the few of us they didn't forget. I want you to hold on to it for your talk. Amara clutched it like a promise. Monday came faster than she expected. When she walked into the classroom with the poster board in her hands, all eyes turned to her. Not with the usual curiosity, but something quieter. The kind of attention people give when they're not sure what to expect. Miss Cartwright stood by her desk, arms crossed, lips pursed. Whenever you're ready, she said coolly. Amara nodded and placed the poster at the front of the class. Her hands were shaking, her breath was tight, but she looked at the photo of her grandmother, then reached into her pocket and held the medal tightly, hidden in her hand. Then she began, Some people change the world without ever raising their V-voice. A pause. No laughter. She went on. My grandmother was a codebreaker. During World War II, she helped stop a war. By low listening, by thinking, by not giving up. Even when her own voice wouldn't come out all right. She paused again. Her eyes found a few faces in the crowd. The boy with glasses, the girl with the paint-stained hoodie, the new ones who hadn't known what to think of her last week. All of them were listening. She pointed to the symbols she'd drawn, the timeline, the secret messages. She didn't fit in, but she found where she belonged. And When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then someone clapped. Then another. Soon the entire class was clapping, not out of pity, but because they had heard something real, something true. Even Miss Cartwright looked different, like something she hadn't expected had just walked straight through a wall she thought was solid. Amara didn't smile. She didn't need to. She had told the story, and this time, everyone heard it. The clapping faded, but the silence it left behind wasn't empty. It was thoughtful. Amara stood at the front of the room, her fingers still gently brushing the edge of her poster board. Her heart beat fast, but it wasn't panic, it was energy, a kind she hadn't felt before. The kind that follows after you speak your truth and nothing bad happens. The woman from the student support team, who had sat quietly in the back of the room during the presentation, rose from her seat with a gentle smile. Thank you, Amara, she said warmly. That wasn't just a story, that was a lesson. Then she turned to the class. This project isn't about impressing anyone. It's about understanding where we come from and how the people in our lives shape us. Amara reminded us that strength doesn't always look like loud voices or perfect words. Sometimes strength is quiet and steady and still powerful. Amara sat back down as the teacher cleared her throat and gestured for the next student to present. But the tone of the room had changed. The energy had shifted. No one giggled. No one whispered. As the next student, a quiet boy who usually sat in the back, stood up to talk about his great-grandfather's journey from a different country, Amara noticed something new. People were really listening. Maybe it was just a moment. Maybe it would all go back to normal the next day. But for now, she had made a crack in something heavy. The rest of the school day passed quietly, but not in the way it used to. When the final bell rang, Amara packed up her things slowly. A few students came up to her, not in a crowd, but one. By one? That was awesome, one girl said. I didn't know anything about codebreakers. Your grandma sounds like a legend, another added. One boy hesitated before speaking. I thought it was cool you didn't try to hide your stutter. I always try to hide my accent and I mess up words all the time. But you didn't, Amara gave a small smile. Talking doesn't have to be perfect. He smiled back. Yeah, I think I needed to hear that. She walked home that day feeling taller. Not because everything had changed, but because something inside her had. That evening, her grandmother was in the garden, tending to her tiny pots of herbs. She loved to grow things, anything that took patience. When Amara walked up behind her, she didn't say anything at first. She just gently placed the medal into her grandmother's hand. "How did it go?" her grandmother asked, not turning around just yet. Amara sat down on the small bench beside the flowers. They clapped. Her grandmother looked over at her, eyes twinkling. "Did they now?" Amara nodded. They listened. A soft breeze passed through the leaves. Her grandmother let out a long, thoughtful breath. "You spoke with more than words today, baby. You spoke with your heart. That's what people remember." Amara rested her head on her grandmother's shoulder. They didn't laugh this time. "Because you showed them something real. You let them see you. That's not easy, but that's what changes people." They sat in silence for a while. Not the kind that fills empty space, but the kind that says everything without a sound. The next day at school, Miss Cartwright surprised everyone. As the students got settled into their seats, she stood at the front, unusually quiet. Then she spoke, not sharply, not with her usual tone, but slower. "I've been teaching for a long time," she said. "I've seen a lot of students come and go. But sometimes one reminds you that you're still learning too." She looked over at Amara. "I want to apologize," she said, clearly, but with effort, "for rushing you, for not understanding what you were carrying." The class went still. Ms. Cartwright continued. "You reminded me that teaching isn't just about correcting mistakes. It's about noticing strengths, even the quiet ones." Amara didn't say anything. She just gave a small nod. That was enough. And just like that, the walls that had been so tall the first week began to come down that afternoon. A new flyer appeared on the school bulletin board. Voices unfolded, a storytelling night. Students were invited to share family stories, cultural histories, or personal memories in any form: spoken word, art, music, even silence. Amara stood in front of it, notebook in hand. Maybe she wouldn't speak this time. Maybe she'd read a poem, or display her grandmother's codes, or maybe she'd stand up, stutter and all, and tell a room full of people, "This is who I am." The days that followed felt softer. Amara still stuttered. That hadn't changed. Some mornings were harder than others, especially when she was tired or nervous. But now, the silence that followed her pauses didn't feel so lonely. It felt like space people were learning to hold for her. By Thursday, something unusual had started to happen. People from other classrooms, students Amara didn't even know, began stopping her in the hallway. "You're the girl who did the codebreaker story, right? My little brother stutters too. I told him about you. He was so happy. Do you think I could help with the next storytelling night?" Amara would nod, surprised each time. She hadn't expected her story to travel. She hadn't expected it to stick. But somehow it had. During lunch, she found a folded note slipped into her locker. No name, just a simple line: "I've always been afraid to speak. Watching you gave me courage." She held the note for a long time before placing it inside her notebook, right next to the one her grandmother had given her. The next big surprise came during art class. Their teacher, a kind woman with paint-streaked sleeves and bright earrings, told the class they'd be starting a project titled Invisible Strength. "Not all strength is loud," she said, her voice calm but full of meaning. "Some of the strongest people we know are the ones who don't fit the usual picture." Amara looked up. The teacher smiled at her, just for a second. Then she continued, "You can paint, sculpt, write, collage, anything that helps you show what strength looks like when it isn't obvious." That night at home, Amara pulled out her grandmother's old notebook again. She studied the symbols, the patterns, the careful notes written in the corners. Pages that once felt like puzzles now felt like mirrors. She had an idea. In the art room the next week, Amara sat alone at a table near the window. Instead of drawing a person or writing a poem, she began building something by hand, a spiral made of tiny, folded pieces of paper, each one containing a word that used to scare her: speak, voice, alone, laugh, different. Each word was written with purpose, then folded like a secret, then placed into the growing spiral. The spiral began to form a shape: a blooming flower, Opening from the center outward, her art teacher stopped by one afternoon and stood quietly beside her. "What's this called?" she asked. Amara looked at it for a moment. Then she whispered, "Becoming." The teacher smiled. "That's beautiful." At the end of the week, the school held the first Voices Unfolded storytelling night. The cafeteria was transformed, strings of fairy lights hung across the ceiling, and folding chairs were arranged in gentle circles. On the walls, student artwork had been pinned, including Amara's spiral. Families came. Students brought siblings, grandparents, even neighbors. There were snacks, a small stage, and a microphone, though not everyone used it. Amara sat with her grandmother in the second row. She didn't plan to speak that night. She had decided she wanted to listen instead. The first speaker was a girl who read a letter to her father overseas. Another shared a story about losing a pet and finding strength in painting. One boy stood silently beside a photo of his mom and just nodded. That was all he needed to say. And then, unexpectedly, Ms. Cartwright took the stage. The room shifted. She held a small note card, but didn't look at it. "I've spent most of my life valuing order, clarity, and speed," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "But one of my students reminded me recently that we don't always grow when things are easy or neat. Sometimes we grow when we're uncomfortable. When we're forced to slow down and actually listen." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "I didn't make that easy for her," she said. "But she taught me anyway, and I'm grateful." She stepped off the stage. Amara blinked slowly. Her grandmother gently squeezed her hand. "See what you did?" she whispered. At the end of the night, someone approached Amara, a younger girl, maybe 8 or 9, with glasses and tightly braided hair. "Hi," the girl said softly. "I stutter too, but I want to be like you, brave." Amara knelt down a little. "You already are," she said, without hesitation. The girl smiled wide, then ran off to her parents. Amara stood still for a moment, watching her go. Not everything had changed. She still struggled some days. She still avoided speaking in front of crowds if she could. But now, when she did speak, people didn't just wait. They listened, and sometimes that was all it took to change everything. Spring came slowly. The air was warmer, but carried a breeze that still remembered winter. Trees were beginning to bud, little green promises of what was to come. Amara stood in the school library, her fingers running along the spines of books, like she was searching for something without knowing the title. She liked the quiet here. It wasn't the silence of fear or avoidance, it was peace. It was the kind of quiet that made space for thoughts to land gently. After her storytelling night and the project in art class, something strange had started happening. Teachers began asking her to help with small things, guiding younger students, helping decorate the hallway for a cultural week, even reading a few lines during the morning announcements. It wasn't that her stutter was gone. It WSN single quotes T. It still showed up, some days like a shadow, some days like a storm, but she no longer tried to hide from it. She had stopped trying to fight her voice and started learning how to move with it. One afternoon, Amara was called to the principal's office, not because she was in trouble, but for something unexpected. The principal, a kind woman with a calm voice and salt and pepper hair, smiled at her from behind her desk. "I've been hearing a lot about you lately," she sighed, motioning for Amara to sit. Amara felt her palms grow damp. "Oh, okay," she said carefully. "Your teachers say you've become a leader in the most unexpected way. You've helped us all see that strength comes in many forms. So, we're creating something new this year, a student voice committee." Amara tilted her head. The principal continued, "It'll be a small group of students who meet once a month to talk about how to make the school a better place for everyone, especially for students who don't always get heard." She paused. "We'd like you to be one of the first members." Amara stared for a moment, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "Me?" she asked. "Yes, you," the principal said gently. "You've already changed the way people listen. Now imagine what you could do with a little more room to speak." That night, Amara told her grandmother everything. They were sitting at the kitchen table, steam rising from 2 mugs of ginger tea. Her grandmother listened, eyes twinkling. "You remember what I told you when you walked out of class that day?" she asked. Amara nodded. "The world may try to shame you for what makes you different, but one day that might be your greatest strength." Her grandmother leaned back with a proud smile. "Looks like that day came faster than we thought." Amara laughed, then grew quiet. "I still get nervous," she admitted, "even when people are kind. I still feel like I might mess up." "You might," her grandmother said simply. "But that doesn't make you less. It just makes you honest. And people are hungry for honesty." The first meeting of the Student Voice Committee took place in a small sunlit room near the library. There were 5 students and 2 teachers. Sitting in a circle, each person was asked to introduce themselves and share one thing they wanted to change or improve about the school. When it was Amara's turn, she didn't rush, she waited. Took a breath. My name is Amara," she began. "And I want to help students like me, kids who don't always get a chance to finish what they're trying to say." The others listened, really listened. No interruptions. No sideways glances. A boy across the circle, who hadn't spoken yet, raised his hand after. "I have did," he said. "Sometimes I get told to focus or calm down when I'm already trying my best. I think I know how that feels," another girl added. "I'm shy. People say I'm quiet, but it's not that I don't think, I just don't always want to say it out loud." One by one, they shared pieces of themselves, and Amara realized this was what power looked like. Not a microphone, not a spotlight. It looked like a circle of people learning to hear each other just as they were. By the end of the meeting, they had written their first goal on the whiteboard. Make space for every voice, even the ones that come slowly. Amara stood for a moment after everyone else had left. The sun was still pouring through the window, lighting up the words on the board. She didn't erase them. She just smiled and walked out quietly, her notebook tucked under her arm. In the hallway, a girl from 3rd grade passed by with her friend. She pointed at Amara. "That's the one," she whispered. "She talks different, but she's the reason we got to do stories in class now." Amara didn't turn around, but her steps felt a little lighter. She was becoming something more than just the girl who stuttered. She was becoming someone who helped others speak. The school year was winding down. Bulletin boards were being cleared. The scent of markers and warm paper filled the classrooms. In the hallways, students counted down the weeks to summer. Yet everything felt a little slower now, as if the school itself didn't want to rush the ending. Amara stood at her locker one afternoon, gently peeling off a sticky note someone had left. It read, "Thank you for helping me not feel weird. No name. Just a message." A quiet gift. Her locker door was now full of them, small, folded notes, kind words scribbled on crumpled paper, tiny drawings of courage and blooming things. She never asked for them. She never expected them. But they arrived anyway, one by one, like echoes of a voice that had finally been heard. The final assembly was set for Friday morning. Students were allowed to nominate classmates for special recognition. Nothing fancy, just quiet shout-outs and stories of kindness, strength, and unexpected leadership. Amara didn't know her name had been submitted. Not until the principal walked up to the microphone and began to speak. "There are students who lead with volume," she said, "and students who lead with example. One of our students reminded us all this year that bravery doesn't always come with perfect words. It comes from showing up anyway." The principal paused, then smiled. "She taught us that real courage is when you speak even when you know it might come out broken. And that broken doesn't mean less." A hush fell over the crowd. "We'd like to recognize Amara for showing us how to listen, how to wait, and how to understand that there is power in every voice." A slow, steady round of applause began, rising like waves. Not the loud, wild kind, but warm, steady, and full of meaning. Amara stood slowly, her heart thudding. She walked to the front of the gym, each step soft but sure. When she turned to face the crowd, she didn't say anything at first. She just looked, and for once, no one filled the silence. They waited. Amara took a breath. I wasn't trying to be SS special," she began, her voice gentle but clear. I just wanted to be myself. Without feeling like that wasn't enough, she looked out across the room at her teachers. Her classmates, the younger kids who had once whispered or stared, now clapping with real smiles. And I think maybe, and my voice was never the problem, she said. Just the way people were listening. The applause returned not louder, just deeper. Like the whole room understood. That evening at home, Amara and her grandmother sat outside on the porch as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the rooftops. The air smelled of lilacs and soil. The world felt quiet, not empty, but peaceful. Her grandmother handed her a new notebook. Leather-bound, soft edges, blank pages waiting. You filled the old one, she said with a wink. Time to start a new story. Amara traced her, fingers across the cover. I didn't think I could do any of this, she said quietly. Her grandmother looked out into the trees, then smiled without looking back. That's the beautiful part, child. None of us know we can. Until we do. Amara opened the notebook to the first page. She didn't write anything yet. She just held it. The next day, she visited the school one last time before summer. She brought a small item wrapped in cloth and handed it to the principal. Inside was a copy of her presentation poster and a printed photo of her grandmother as a codebreaker. Tucked neatly beside it was a note for the library wall so other quiet kids know they come from strength, too. The principal read it, her eyes shining. We'll frame it. And we'll hang it right near the reading corner where the stories live. Amara smiled. It wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to others now. On the last day of school, Amara passed a group of students sitting under her favorite tree. They had notebooks in their laps and pencils in hand. One of them waved. Hey, Amara, want to join our writing group? She paused, then sat down in the grass beside them. No need to lead. No need to impress. She just opened her notebook and wrote one small line at the top. This is not the end. And it wasn't, because courage doesn't finish, it unfolds. One word at a time, one voice at a time, one girl at a time, who simply decided she didn't need to be loud to be heard.